Well, hi there. I'm here with a baby frog, and this frog is an Amazon milk frog, also known as Amazon cave tree frogs. They're one of my absolute favorite frogs in the world. And this one comes to us from Animal Ark in Orem, Utah, which is an awesome pet store that has Amazon milk frogs, because they're amazing. I have loved these guys for years. They are so unusual and beautiful. Their patterning is so neat. They're black and white, so they look a little bit like pandas to start with. They've got these kind of goldeny eyes, and then they've got almost like constellations, little white dots on them. And if you get them in the light just right, they have some blues that kind of pop out. Now that blue is actually because, as I understand it, their blood is blue, and so a lot of their internal structures, including organs, are blue also. And you can see some serious blue coming through the areas of thin skin. They're so unusual. Now they do get quite a bit bigger than the one that I'm holding here today. This one is just a little froglet. This is one of the larger tree frogs that you're going to encounter. This one's up there in size with the White's tree frog. So, probably not quite the size of a fist, but pretty dang big tree frog when they're adults, which is pretty neat. Obviously, I love these guys. They're just incredible. But I should mention, I've never owned one. To this point, I haven't decided that it's the right time in my life to get Amazon milk frogs, but I can guarantee to you that time is coming for me. They're always on my list of someday I have to have these because I adore them. And to help you decide if the time is right for you to have an Amazon milk frog, we have scored these based on our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 4 gloved fingers out of 5. I mean, as far as amphibians go, they don't get any better. These guys are spectacular to handle. Really, the only downside to them at all is just that they are amphibians, and so they suffer from typical amphibian problems. Those amphibian problems include the fact that they can dry out, so you don't want to keep them out too long, and you definitely don't want them to get away in your house, because your house is probably not adequately humid for these guys to survive long term. Also, their skin, being amphibians, is permeable, and as a result, not only water but other chemicals and soaps and things that might be on your fingers can actually end up inside of their body, coursing through their blue blood. You don't want this. And so what I'm doing is probably the best thing you can do, which is wear gloves whenever you handle them. Alternatively, you can wash your hands very, very well and make sure that you get all soap off, and then you might be okay, but I would only handle them very, very sparingly. In that way, it'd be much better to use protection like this to keep them protected from you, because you're covered in gross horror and they don't want it in their bodies. Other than that, I mean, they're just spectacular. They're not going to bite you. They're not going to scratch you because they don't have any claws. They've just got these spectacular suction cup grippy feet. The suction cups on their toes are so incredibly powerful. They honestly probably make most gecko toes look not all that grippy. Well, one thing about these guys is they're jumping around up in the canopy, up in high in trees. And you don't just want to fall out of the tree. And these guys, when they jump, they can catch and stop their momentum. So catch their whole body weight and stop their momentum with any one of their toe pads. So like if one toe pad grabs a leaf, the whole frog will just kind of swing around and be up on the leaf from one toe pad. They're insane. And they've got 18 of these. They can jump because they're frogs, but as frogs go, I mean, these guys are super just mellow and laid back. Look at this guy. When you're a baby frog, the world is a scary place. And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to hang out on this finger. Let me know when we're done filming. Like I said, they can jump, but for a frog, these guys are very, very easy to handle, not going to jump away from you. They're just going to hang out with you, which is unbelievable. The truth is, though, amphibians don't need to be handled. You assume certain dangers whenever you handle them. So it's not necessary at all, and it is a little bit of a risk. But in moderation, for amphibians, these guys do as well as can be imagined. I'd like to pause for just a moment to say thank you to our patrons at Patreon, who honestly have done so much to help this channel progress, to upgrade our equipment. We're going to be getting a new camera soon because we've been killing our existing camera filming these videos, and so thank you so much for making the future of this channel possible. When it comes to care, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 3 out of 5. The care is actually fairly simple. It's just that you're going to need to engage in some level of care on a fairly regular basis. They're going to need an aquarium that holds humidity pretty well, but you don't want everything inside of there to mold. So when you're picking substrate and furnishing and stuff like that, you definitely don't want it to mold. I would recommend putting a drainage layer in there. And then, you can do a backdrop a lot like we did in our bioactive build, if you've seen this. But like I said, include a drainage layer, and I would use a much larger enclosure because these guys do get huge for tree frogs. You're going to need a good lid, because if you don't have a good lid, I mean, these guys can climb right up glass and squeeze through pretty small holes, so it needs a good lid, and you may need to cover portions of that lid with something like saran wrap or glass, something to maintain that humidity. It's largely going to depend on what the ambient humidity is like in your home, as far as how much of that lid you need to cover, because you also don't want the air to be super stagnant, so you don't necessarily want it completely covered. You want some ventilation. One of the biggest pains about these guys is, in addition to the fact that they're going to need frequent mistings that we'll talk about here in a moment, they need live food, and they need it on a fairly regular basis. They're not going to eat a ton of insects at any one time. These guys are going to be mostly insect eaters. You're not going to need to give them a ton at any one time, but you are going to need to feed them several times a week, and that means you need almost constant access to insects. Make sure you dust those with vitamins and calcium supplements as well. So that's a pain, but it's kind of, they're really fun to feed. Tree frogs can be really engaging to watch eat, because they will leap from all the way across the enclosure to get to whatever it is that you're feeding to them, and that's pretty fun. They're amazing acrobats. Like I said, they're going to need frequent mistings, probably at least once a day, maybe twice a day. Just monitor your humidity. You're definitely going to want a humidity gauge for these guys so that you know if your humidity is right or not. Because they lose water through their skin, they can become dehydrated and die very quickly if humidity isn't appropriate. Additionally, because they lose water through their skin, they also can uptake things through their skin, and so you need to make sure that any water you're using in their enclosure has been dechlorinated and treated, and that it is as clean as possible, because any impurities or chemicals will get into their bodies. You may need to use a heat mat at certain times of year to maintain the temperatures in their enclosure, but generally speaking, high temperatures are going to be a bigger threat to these guys than low temperatures, and they tend to do well at temperatures that, at least in the United States, are about the temperatures at which we maintain our homes most of the time. So if you're keeping your home not too cold or too warm, you might not need anything to regulate temperature. If you do have a heat mat, make sure you're using a thermostat, because high temperatures can be a major danger for these guys. Another thing you're going to always want to include in order to prevent them from dehydrating is a water bowl. These guys, in addition to the misting and the proper humidity levels, they need a water bowl. You'll notice, especially when they're a little bit dehydrated, they'll go and sit in the water bowl. And the skin right kind of around their thigh area it's really thin. You'll be able to see that blue blood really clearly through the skin there, and they can absorb a lot of water just by sitting in water, and that's pretty neat. And like I said before, these guys, they're going to do well in a bioactive enclosure, and so watching our build, learning things about cleanup crews like isopods and springtails will be very, very helpful. When it comes to hardiness, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 4 out of 5. These are really just as solid as any amphibian you're going to get. Amphibians, they're just susceptible to some things that many reptiles are not, And so they're all going to score a little bit lower than reptiles, but these guys, good as an amphibian can be. And they even have a pretty long lifespan, as far as we understand. We really haven't been keeping them that long, so it looks like they can live 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer. We just don't really know yet. The biggest dangers to them are going to be things like exposure to chemicals, heat, and dehydration. Also pathogens, fungus, so try not to expose them to anything from the wild. Make sure you're probably not exposing them to other amphibians, especially if they're exhibiting any sort of strange symptoms. But in isolation and given proper care, I mean, these guys should really, really thrive for you, just as good as a frog can be. When it comes to availability, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 3 out of 5. I'm honestly seeing these guys more and more and more often. When I first started loving these guys, I'd never seen one in person. It was years between when I first discovered these existed and the first time that I saw them. But, I mean, I've seen them for sale at many different places just this year. And this is largely due to the fact that they are super cool, and frogs are very, very prolific breeders. So they're really good at making more frogs. And so when people decide to breed frogs, I mean, if you decide to breed ball pythons, you might get 6 to 8 babies per clutch, per female that you have. You might have hundreds of Amazon milk frogs. That's awesome. As I mentioned before, this one comes to us from Animal Ark in Orem, Utah. So definitely, if you're in the neighborhood, check them out. Also, I mean, if you're looking for an Amazon milk frog or really anything, you can contact them by calling them, visiting their website, but I think giving them a call and just seeing what they have, they do ship all throughout the continental United States. So definitely check them out. In addition to Animal Ark, they are now starting to pop up at other pet stores, also reptile expos and online. I mean, you can get them almost all the time. When it comes to upfront costs, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 4 out of 5. The frog is not the least expensive of frogs. I mean, they're up there, right around $50, which is kind of an expensive frog, but it's not insanely expensive. The enclosure, is also not stupendously inexpensive, but it's not crazy expensive either. You're gonna need some sort of a glass enclosure with a good lid. I would recommend some sort of front opening enclosure so that you're not putting that lid on and off all the time, where you might crush them or not put it on properly and they might escape. And another nice thing, if you're not having to move the lid, is if you're putting glass on top of it or saran wrap or something like that to maintain humidity, you're not going to have to be messing with that all the time. You'll just be accessing the enclosure through the front doors. A tub can work if necessary, but that wouldn't be the direction I would go with these guys. I would go with some sort of glass enclosure. You're going to need a water bowl, as we mentioned, and substrate, and I'd use some sort of sphagnum moss to maintain humidity. Make sure that substrate won't mold. You're going to need a misting bottle or a misting system, water conditioner, because remember, chemicals are a big deal with these guys. You're going to need lights, really mostly only if you're using live plants. Otherwise, the ambient lighting in your room will probably be sufficient for them, though UVB lighting would probably do nothing but help. Certainly not going to do them any harm. And heat mat and a thermostat might be necessary depending on the temperatures at which you keep your house. And we'll have links to all these things down in the description as always. And for these reasons, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 3.6 out of 5, which is a really pretty great score for an amphibian, especially one that, until recently was pretty hard to find. In a lot of ways, these are just a black and white South American version of the White's tree frog or dumpy tree frog that we've covered before, which is another really great option. I love them as well. They're stupendously similar to this, probably a little bit less expensive, but there's just something special about the look of these frogs. I love them. The similarities to the White's tree frog really just mean that the Amazon milk frog is just a really, really great pet tree frog that happens to look stinking rad in a very unfrog-like way, because most frogs aren't black and white little pandas with constellations on them. If what you want is a fantastic pet tree frog that isn't green, because as we know, it's not easy being green, then the Amazon milk frog just might be the perfect pet frog for you. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. All right, try to relax.
I'm having trauma already.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Clint.
Yeah, you've got some things to look forward
Thanks
to.
for that.
I saw a thing, I don't know how substantiated it is, but 10 people a year are killed by sharks.
Yeah.
100 people a year are trampled by cows.
I believe it.
We should have Cow Week.
Yes.
Turtle?
Is that what?
I thought it was Michelle.
No, I thought it was you. That's impressive.
Weep. Well played, Mr. Turtle. It smells like smoke.
It does.
That would be Will. He's forging coins in the backyard.
Forging coins. Of course. Why wouldn't he?
Why is Will so neat?
I don't know.
He's a neat human.
Speaking of Will,
How neat did you know he was when you selected him?
these are not the licking frogs, right?
No, you don't ever want to experiment with which one is the licking frog.
Yeah.
Right? When it comes to handle ability, we give the Amazon milk frog a score of 4 nitrile gloved fingers. What would I call this? 4 out of 5, but not. Anyway,